Tonight on Levin TV, morality, justice, and principles. What do they mean in this election? What should we constitutional conservatives do? Tonight on Levin TV. Now, let's take a look at this. I have contended, and I will continue to contend, that more and more, let's put these down, I don't need these, we live in a post-constitutional America. We're that far from living in a no-constitutional America. We really are, for all intents and purposes. This has been the aim of the statists for over 100 years as we moved into the progressive movement, trashing the Declaration, the whole notion of unalienable individual rights, natural law, trashing that whole idea, importing this massive bureaucratic effort from Germany and other parts of Europe right before the turn of the last century, in the 1890s. It was championed by Theodore Roosevelt, and it was championed by Woodrow Wilson. And they did enormous damage to this country. And it goes on today. So rather than unalienable individual rights, we don't even focus on individual rights anymore, do we? What's in the communal interest? What's in the best interest? Well, how do they know? We don't even know who these people are. And how many more examples of their failures do we need? The latest being Obamacare. So let's look at this as the power of the Washington ruling class, their grip tightens and tightens as their power expands and expands. I'm talking here about basics. The consent of the governed, free will of the individual. They're being smothered. They're being devoured. This is a very, very serious matter. Let's take a look very quickly. Article 1 of the Constitution. Gee, what is this, for a 3-year-old? Just saying. Article 1. Article 2. Actually, as I use it, I'm starting to like it. Article 3. Now let's understand a couple of firsts here. This is the separation of powers under the Constitution of the United States. This. Article 1, Congress, the legislature. Article 2, the executive, the president. Article 3, the courts. This is what was so fundamental, going all the way back to the ancients. You had to divide power if you wanted a republic. This is the sort of thing you needed to do. Well, what's happening? Congress, right? President, right? Courts. Which is the most powerful? By far, today, which is the most powerful? Day to day, on a daily basis. Which is by far the second most powerful? By far. They only get involved in about 100, 120 cases a year, but when they decide to get involved in an issue, whatever it is, which is the most powerful? By far, number 2. Which is the least powerful? Congress. The people's body is the least powerful now of the 3 branches. The least powerful. For a lot of reasons. For a lot of reasons. But most of all, for 100 years, the left, the progressives, I call them the statists, have attempted to empower the president and the courts. Why the president and the courts? Because this body changes in the House every 2 years, the Senate, a third of them every 6 years. If you can concentrate more and more power in the federal government, you need to concentrate it in the hands of one individual more than anything else. Now, why is the president the most powerful of these 3 branches now? Why is that? Stick with me. This is a story, and we got to get to it. Because of the 4th branch of government. A 4th branch of government that's not even in your United States Constitution. This massive administrative state, set up as a result of the progressive movement, replacing the will of the individual, replacing the private sector, replacing liberty with bureaucrats, pretend experts, pretend professionals who are going to manage our lives because they bring so much brilliance to the process. It's called a scientific approach. That's what John Dewey and others called it. There's nothing scientific about it. It's an iron-fisted approach by people you don't know, who you don't vote for. When you go and vote in an election, you can't remove them. And it's getting bigger and bigger and more powerful. They exist under the president, and that's no mistake. You have all these executive departments and agencies. Can you name them all? Do you know the president can't name them all? Do you know members of Congress can't name them all? The media can't name them all? I can't name them all, unless I go look and start listing them all. So what they're doing must be very, very important, ladies and gentlemen, because we don't even know who they are. We can't name them. And yet they're funded every year. In fact, they get increases in funds. They get increases in personnel. And they spit out thousands of regulations every single year. Thousands. Some of which have the penalty of law behind them. You can go to prison if you violate them, and you don't even know what they are for the most part. You don't have lawyers telling you what's going on at the EPA, at the Agriculture Department, at HHS, and Interior, at Energy, and on and on and on. And so you're overwhelmed with this red tape. And so the individual is smothered. What did the Declaration of Independence say? Unalienable rights. For whom? For you, the individual. God-given unalienable rights. This is replacing that. This is where most of the action is for the statist. They get a lot of times what they want out of Congress, too, by the way, like Obamacare, like Dodd-Frank, and so forth and so on. But more times than not, this body either goes along with the executive, it confers its own power on the executive unconstitutionally, it funds what the executive wants, it borrows the monies that the executive quote-unquote needs. This pretty much has become, not completely, but oddly, almost an appendage of this. Now, in a parliamentary system, like Britain, this, the prime minister in their case, is part of this, the parliament. But we have it reversed, don't we? Now the courts. What about the courts? Read Article 3 of the Constitution. It says almost nothing about the courts. There's a little bit about the Supreme Court. The only court the Constitution actually establishes is the Supreme Court. It doesn't establish its circuit courts, any of these federal district trial courts. Those were established by Congress. The jurisdiction for the appellate courts and the federal district courts were established by Congress. I'll bet you didn't even know that. Early on in our history, we had judiciary acts. Today, Congress dare not touch the authority of the courts. Otherwise, all hell will break loose. Why? Why? Because the courts are doing the business. The courts are doing the business of the statists. The most powerful, the second most powerful branch, the least powerful branch. Now, here's what's interesting about Article 1 in Congress. In the Constitution, Congress has most of the tools. There's a reason why it's Article 1 and not Article 2 or 3, because when the framers met in Philadelphia, they wanted to make sure that Congress was, although they're co-equal branches, that Congress had the most tools in order to be a manifestation of the will of the people and to prevent tyranny. And so Congress has the power to impeach and remove a president, a vice president, or top officials. Congress has the power of the purse. Congress has the power to borrow. Congress has the power to set currency. Congress has the power, in the Senate particularly, to ratify treaties, and so forth and so on. So much of the action is here. And the framers were so smart, they didn't even trust one body in Congress. They created two, the House of Representatives and the Senate. Now, I want you to think about this. Early in the last century, in the early 1900s, led by Republican presidents, the progressive movement was on the rise. It's called the Progressive Era. And I want to remind you, when Theodore Roosevelt ran for the third time as president, he left the Republican Party. He ran as a member of the leader of the Bull Moose Party, but the official name was the Progressive Party. The Progressive Party. Taft was a progressive, too. Taft supported the 16th and 17th Amendments to the Constitution. Even though the president has no role, he pushed for them. And they went to the states, most of which were Republican, and they ratified the federal income tax and that 17th Amendment, which did what to this? It destroyed the Senate. It destroyed the United States Senate. The Senate was to be selected, or members elected, by the state legislatures, or the state legislatures were to determine how the senators would be selected. So because the progressive movement pretends to be a populist movement, It changed all that. Now you vote for your senator, and I'm sure you're thrilled about it, right? But that's not the way it was supposed to work. The Senate was supposed to represent the states, and in specific, the state legislatures. So what happened? The progressive movement basically, in part, destroyed the power of Congress. Progressives in Congress have destroyed the power of Congress. Republicans in Congress have bent over backwards to accept what the progressives have done to Congress. The presidency, Obama, the worst, latest example, continues to muscle up and to centralize power. Even when Congress won't pass laws, he'll pass them himself, either through dictate, through treaty, or through the bureaucracy. And the courts, for the vast majority of the time, gives its rubber stamp to the president. So we have essentially the destruction of separation of powers. It's an ongoing process, but it's only going in one direction. And this massive bureaucracy set up by the progressives, the statists, which they use to pass laws, to enforce laws, to do whatever it is they want to do to society. And there's no check and balance whatsoever. Mark, why is this important? It's very important. Just stay with me. Consent of the governed under the attack, individual free will under attack, the principles under the Declaration under attack, the individuals being devoured by red tape, by dictate. We're in a more and more egregious post-constitutional situation in this country. Now, what about the country as a whole? Well, in order to have a country as a whole, we call it a nation state. It has to have definable borders. It has to have a language. It has to have a unique culture. That's why assimilation is so crucial. The framers understood this. Everybody's understood it until about the last 50 years, when the Democrat Party figured out that the way that we can ensure election victory after election victory is slowly but surely, gradually change the citizen, change the population. And you've heard me say it, import Democrats. Import people who don't necessarily contribute to the country, but for the most part, 60, 70, 80% will vote Democrat. And remember, this is about power. It's about power for the statists. Who gets to decide what? They know how to get it, they know how to keep it, they know how to exercise it. Not the same with Republicans. Republicans are busy attacking conservatives. The nation state is unique. Ours is very unique. We have a unique American culture. That's what we mean by American exceptionalism. We have a constitutional system like no other country has ever had, a magnificent system. The whole idea of citizenship in this country is different than most other countries. When it comes to, you've heard about the cowboy American, the individual American. What that means is we believe in individualism as spelled out in our Declaration. And of course, our culture is unique. And that's a good thing. And so if people aren't going to assimilate into our culture, either by design or because there's so many coming into the country legally and illegally, and more than that, if our government is encouraging not to assimilate into the culture, a declaration of independence-based culture, but to want more government, to become wards of government, to get goodies from government, then they're not going to assimilate. They'll vote Democrat. Because the Democrat Party, much like the Republican Party, but particularly the Democrat Party, is about government, government, and more government. So the whole notion of our nation state is under attack. The Republicans surrendered the treaty power in an outrageous and unconscionable act, an immoral act, to Obama in this Iran deal, which I'll get to shortly. They violated their constitutional oath, and Obama seized the power. Now, the reason why this is important, and crucially important, is you cannot just grant that kind of power. Congress has no authority to do that to a president, but even more, externally, outside the United States. We hear this term globalized and globalization, and you must be a globalist, and it's applied to trade. It's nothing to do with trade. A globalist is somebody who supports international governance, who opposes borders, who rejects American sovereignty. Now, why would we agree to turn this country inside out and then turn it over to the rest of the world? The rest of the world should be copying what we do. And yet this election, in many respects, will affect that too. Let's look at our Bill of Rights of the Constitution. Let's just look at the first two. I won't go through all of them. The First Amendment, freedom of speech. The FCC, under the Democrats, under this president, has made numerous attempts to attack the free speech rights of those with whom they disagree. They're already surrendering the internet, something they don't even have any right to international organizations that include the Chinese and the Russians and other enemies of America and others who don't appreciate free speech. The internet. They seek to attack talk radio, and they will attack talk radio, and they will attack cable channels that they disagree with. And I'm sure they'll attack Levin TV too. This is a totalitarian mindset, understand. It is a government-first mindset. What else about the First Amendment? Religious liberty. Now, people who are practicing faithful Christians are under attack in this society. They're being forced to bake cakes for weddings they don't want to bake cakes for. They're being forced to cater weddings they don't want to cater to, and on and on and on. They're being forced to subsidize abortions, even if they don't believe in abortion. Even churches, indirectly, that preach life and oppose abortion. They're being attacked because their health care doesn't cover abortion. And it's interesting, not since Obamacare and Barack Obama has the American taxpayer had to pay for abortions. It was always agreed, whatever the court decides, whatever the government decides. There are people in this country, tens of millions, for a moral reason, who do not believe in it and should not be forced to pay for it. It used to be called the Hyde Amendment. Existed for over 15 years. We talked about this. All changed under Barack Obama. Now you're forced to do what you don't want to do. Look at Obamacare. It is a complete disaster. You're forced to pay for something that you reject. How did that happen? Well, it wasn't because of you. So the First Amendment, religious liberty under attack, freedom of speech under attack. Let's look at the Second Amendment. We have a presidential candidate on the Democrat side who's made it abundantly clear she's going after the Second Amendment. The Bill of Rights exists to protect you from the government. The government has no authority to steal your Bill of Rights. That's the whole purpose of the Bill of Rights. But folks, when government becomes this powerful, this centralized, when the checks and balances are all but eviscerated, when the courts back up what an imperial, soft, despotic presidency does, where do you go? I want to get to this issue of morality. Oh, I can spell. And justice. And let me add another one. Principle. Okay. You're the smartest audience of audiences, so I don't need to spend a lot of time. We know about Donald Trump's weaknesses. I know he's not a principled, consistent, philosophical conservative, let alone a constitutional conservative. I know when he says certain things, he's unreliable, he might change. As you know, I'm not a Trump guy. I'm not among the pom-pom guys and gals or the Rockettes out there who are Trump, Trump, Trump. He's a conservative. I know what he is. But I know one other thing. There's one candidate who despises this country, and there's one candidate who doesn't despise this country. Hillary Clinton despises America. She steals from it. She cheats it. She lies to its people. And she wants to destroy what's left of our constitutional order because it's in her best political and personal interest. And so I look at this and I think to myself, what is the moral thing to do in this election? What is the moral thing to do in this election? As a constitutional conservative, as somebody who campaigned for Reagan twice, as somebody who worked in the Reagan administration for 8 years, as somebody who writes books about liberty and the Constitution and American greatness, what should I do? What should we do? Sit it out? I just spent I don't know how long barely touching the surface about the left, the statists, Hillary Clinton and Obama, 16 more years of this, or 8 more years, it's 16 total. To me, even though Trump is not my guy, It's damage control time. That in this country, the way our system's set up, we have a limited choice. A limited choice. Now, you as an individual have 5 choices. You can vote for Donald Trump, you can vote for Hillary Clinton, you can vote for a third party, you can write somebody in, or you can sit out when it comes to the presidency. But the country is not going to do that. The country is going to decide the President of the United States by choosing either Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. And let me tell you something. Today is the day to act. People are voting right now. And on November 8th, many of you, many of us will be voting in person. So to me, the moral thing is to do what we can under these circumstances to protect what's left of our constitutional order, which isn't a lot, to protect what's left of our republic, to protect what's left of our national sovereignty, to protect the United States military, to protect police officers around this country, to protect families, to do that, to protect the private sector, to do what we can do, to do what we can do. Is the moral thing to do nothing? You know, when you study history, and particularly when you look at military history, or when you think about the young men and women in uniform today, maybe they don't like the major they report to, or the colonel, or maybe they think the brigadier general's out to lunch. But there's the enemy. Now, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do? You do the best you can do. You have to defeat the enemy. Hillary Clinton's not the adversary. Hillary Clinton's the enemy. She's telling you what she's going to do to this country. It is frightening. Think about this. She wants to raise the inheritance tax to 65%. Now, that may not affect many of you. I don't remember the amount. Maybe it triggers at $3 million or $5 million or $3.5 million, whatever it is. You might say, well, that's those people. No, it's not those people. If you've started a small business and you have built assets of $10 million, but maybe you barely cut through each year in terms of revenue, net revenue. Maybe you make a couple $100,000, $500,000, but you've built this infrastructure, you've capitalized it, and then you die. And you've paid taxes all along the way, federal income taxes, state taxes, local taxes, property taxes, taxes on this, taxes on that. You haven't cheated anybody, you've paid it. Then you pass away and you want to leave it to your kids. And you can't pay the taxes on it. Even though it doesn't make a hell of a lot of money, you've already invested millions of dollars in it. Guess what happens? You lose it. Now, what justice is there in that? There's no justice in that. What, are you going to get the rich? You just took out a farmer. Is that getting the rich? You just took out a small businessman. Is that getting the rich? No, it's not getting the rich. It's ridiculous. We don't live for the government. We don't exist for the government. Our labor's not about the government. We're trying to take care of our families and leave something to our kids. So what if somebody leaves $1 billion or $5? That's the life they decided to live, and they left it to their kids, and they already paid taxes. What the hell business is it of government to step in and take it? None. There's a whole mindset that's at work here. Now, this issue of justice. Do you think packing the courts with Alinsky ideologues will bring justice? Do you think allowing the Justice Department to continue to be the most corrupt Justice Department in American history is justice? Do you think all those FBI agents who are trying to do the right thing, whether it's track down potential Islamic terrorists, criminals, or politicians, and bring them to justice, do you think it's fair to them and fair to the country as a whole to continue to have an FBI led by this guy Comey and senior management? I know he's there another 6 years, but I think a Republican president and a Republican Congress should remove him. I think he's demonstrated he is the biggest obstructor in American history. Is that justice, to leave all that in place, the infrastructure that's unjust? No, it's not justice. Is it justice to go after companies in this country that don't fold and buckle under to the left? No, that's not justice. That's injustice. Do you think it's justice in this country when you have the Department of Homeland Security trying to make citizens of as many people as humanly possible to benefit the Democrats? No. So what's the action you should take in order to promote justice? Defeat Hillary Clinton. Defeat Hillary Clinton. Principle. The issue is your principles. What is the best step to take under these circumstances that promote or defend your principles as best as you can? Again, under these circumstances, you know, if life were easy, this wouldn't be a big deal. I wouldn't have to be here with this chart. It wouldn't be a complicated election. This guy's this guy's that. It's not that way. Life is never easy. You have to make difficult decisions, principled decisions. So what is the principled decision in this case? Well, Mark, that guy's a cad. Well, so is she. The principled thing is to put country first. Put the institutions of our country first. No, they're not going to be saved, and they're not going to be revived, and so forth and so on. What you're trying to do is stem the disaster, to put it off as long as you can so we can regroup, so we can fight it out the next 4 years, so we can fight it out in the intervening months, and so forth and so on. So what's the principled thing to do as a constitutional conservative? The principled thing to do is not throw your vote to somebody you know who's not going to win. It's not to sit home and just watch it and then say, gee, aren't I principled? It's to get in the fight and do something about it.